I walked into my grandfather's grand dining room expecting our usual Thanksgiving celebration, but instead found myself facing the most devastating betrayal of my life. My sister Amanda stood beside the mahogany table where our family had gathered for decades, clutching a stack of legal documents like weapons. The moment she saw me, her eyes lit up with calculated malice. "Cyrus," she announced to our 20 assembled relatives, "you need to sign the deed to the $8.8 million estate over to me right now." I stared at her in complete shock, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. When I stammered that I wouldn't do any such thing, my mother Sarah rose from her chair and slapped me hard across the face in front of everyone. The sting of my mother's hand across my cheek burned less than the humiliation of being struck in front of our entire extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had known me since childhood now watched me like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. The dining room that had always felt warm and welcoming suddenly seemed cold and hostile. Amanda's voice cut through the stunned silence with surgical precision. "Mother has finally realized what I've been trying to tell her for months," she said, waving the documents with theatrical flair. "Cyrus is mentally unstable and completely unfit to manage grandfather's estate." She pulled out what appeared to be medical reports and spread them across the polished table surface. "These psychiatric evaluations clearly show that he suffers from severe bipolar disorder and has been making increasingly erratic financial decisions." My jaw dropped as I stared at papers that supposedly contained my medical information. I had never seen a psychiatrist in my life, yet here were documents claiming I had been diagnosed with multiple mental health conditions over the past several months. The letterhead looked official, complete with doctor signatures and clinic stamps. My mother's tear-stained face crumpled with what appeared to be genuine anguish. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered, reaching toward me with trembling fingers. "But Amanda is right. You've been acting so strange lately, forgetting conversations, making wild statements about money. I can't risk you destroying everything your grandfather worked so hard to build." Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His weathered hands gripped his coffee cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. He caught my eye for just a moment and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head before looking away. Something about his expression suggested he knew more than he was saying. "The medical evidence is overwhelming." Amanda continued, her voice gaining strength as she sensed the family's growing acceptance of her narrative. "Dr. Harrison at the Riverside Psychiatric Center has been treating Cyrus for 8 months now. His condition has deteriorated significantly, and he's been talking about using the inheritance money for increasingly bizarre investment schemes." I felt like I was living in a nightmare. "Amanda, what are you talking about? I've never been to any psychiatric center. I don't even know a Dr. Harrison. These documents are completely fabricated." Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, stood up from her place near the fireplace. Her normally gentle demeanor had been replaced by something harder and more suspicious. "Cyrus, honey, denial is a classic symptom of your condition. The family has to protect itself from your poor judgment. Amanda has shown us bank records proving that you've already tried to access the estate funds inappropriately." More papers appeared on the table, these showing what looked like attempted wire transfers and suspicious financial activity linked to accounts bearing my name. The documentation appeared legitimate, complete with bank logos and official stamps. I recognized my signature on several forms, though I had no memory of signing any of them. The family lawyer, Benjamin Walsh, sat quietly in the corner, observing everything with an unreadable expression. He was a thin man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I had expected him to defend my interests as the estate's primary beneficiary, but instead, he remained silent, occasionally taking notes in a leather portfolio. My younger cousin Jake, who was barely 21, had his phone out and was recording everything. "This is just for family documentation," he explained when I noticed the camera pointed in my direction. Amanda suggested we should keep records of tonight's proceedings for legal purposes. The suggestion that my own family was building a case against me sent chills down my spine. These weren't strangers trying to steal from me. These were people who had celebrated my birthdays, attended my graduation, and supported me through difficult times. Now they were treating me like I was mentally incompetent and dangerous. Amanda sensed the momentum shifting in her favor and pressed her advantage. If Cyrus refuses to sign these papers voluntarily, I'm prepared to have him committed for psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Harrison has already signed the necessary forms for an involuntary commitment. We can have him taken to a secure facility tonight if necessary. The threat hit me like a physical blow. My sister was talking about having me locked up in a mental institution based on falsified medical reports. The casual way she discussed destroying my freedom made me realize how thoroughly she had planned this assault on my life. Several relatives who had initially looked uncomfortable with the confrontation now nodded in agreement with Amanda's position. The fake medical evidence was convincing, and my protests were beginning to sound exactly like the denial that Aunt Patricia had described as a symptom of mental illness. Uncle Robert finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should slow down a bit. This is all happening very fast, and Cyrus deserves a chance to respond to these allegations properly. Amanda's eyes flashed with anger at the first sign of resistance to her plan. Uncle Robert, with all due respect, Cyrus has had months to get help for his condition. Instead, he's been hiding his illness and putting the entire family's financial security at risk. We can't afford to wait any longer. She turned to address the entire room with the confidence of someone who knew she held all the cards. I've consulted with legal experts about the best way to handle this situation. If Cyrus doesn't sign these transfer documents by midnight tonight, I'll have no choice but to initiate emergency proceedings to have him declared mentally incompetent. The court will appoint a guardian to manage the estate, and that process could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. The deadline felt like a sword hanging over my head. I was trapped in a corner with no allies and no clear way to prove my innocence. The evidence against me looked convincing, and my family clearly believed Amanda's version of events. Even my own mother had turned against me based on whatever lies my sister had been feeding her for months. Benjamin Walsh closed his portfolio and looked directly at Amanda for the first time all evening. His expression was completely neutral, but something about the intensity of his gaze made me wonder what he was really thinking about this whole situation. I needed space to think clearly, so I excused myself from the dining room and retreated to my grandfather's study. The familiar smell of old leather and pipe tobacco usually brought me comfort, but tonight it only reminded me of everything I was about to lose. The walls were lined with books my grandfather had collected over 70 years, and his massive oak desk still held the fountain pen he'd used to sign important documents. As I sat in his worn leather chair trying to process the nightmare unfolding around me, I noticed something I had never seen before. Behind a section of the bookshelf dedicated to American history, there was a gap between two volumes that revealed what looked like a hidden safe built into the wall. My grandfather had been meticulous about security, but he'd never mentioned any concealed compartments in his study. The safe's combination lock appeared to be an old mechanical model with numbers worn smooth from decades of use. On a desperate impulse, I tried my grandfather's birthday. Nothing. I tried my grandmother's birthday, still nothing. Then I remembered something he'd told me years ago about the importance of family history. I entered the year our family had first arrived in America, and the heavy door clicked open. Inside the cramped compartment, I found a manila envelope marked with my name in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. The envelope contained a letter dated exactly 1 week before his death, along with several other documents that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The letter began with words that made my hands tremble. My dear Cyrus, if you are reading this, then Amanda has begun her final assault on our family's integrity, just as I predicted she would. My grandfather's careful script continued. I have known about your sister's true nature for many years, but I lacked sufficient proof to act until recently. 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator named Marcus Chen to document her activities. What he discovered will shock you, but it will also give you the weapons you need to protect yourself and our family from her manipulations. The next document was a comprehensive investigative report that detailed Amanda's involvement in our father's business collapse 5 years earlier. According to the private investigator's findings, Amanda had systematically sabotaged Dad's construction company by leaking confidential bid information to competing contractors. She had access to his files through her job as his administrative assistant, and she used that access to ensure that he lost every major contract for 8 months. The financial records were devastating. Amanda had secretly taken out loans against the business, using forged documents and her access to Dad's accounts. When those loans went into default, they triggered a cascade of financial problems that ultimately destroyed the company Dad had spent 20 years building. The investigator had documented phone calls between Amanda and representatives from rival construction firms. Transcripts showed her providing detailed information about Dad's pricing strategies, material costs, and project timelines. In exchange, she received cash payments that she deposited into secret accounts under fake names. The most heartbreaking discovery was the connection between Amanda's sabotage and our father's fatal heart attack. The stress of losing his business, combined with the shame of bankruptcy and the impact on our family's reputation, had literally killed him. Amanda hadn't just stolen money, she had murdered our father through calculated psychological torture. But the investigative report revealed even more disturbing information. Amanda had been embezzling money from our grandmother's nursing home fund for over 2 years. While claiming she couldn't afford to contribute to Grandma's care, she had actually been skimming money from the account and spending it on luxury vacations, expensive clothes, and a secret apartment in downtown Hartford. Photographs in the file showed Amanda at exclusive restaurants wearing designer jewelry and driving a BMW that she had supposedly leased with money she'd borrowed from friends. The contrast between her claimed poverty and her actual lifestyle was stark and undeniable. My grandfather's letter continued. The psychiatric reports she has shown your mother are completely fabricated. Dr. Harrison is a corrupt physician who has been paid to create false medical records for Amanda's schemes. She has used similar tactics against other wealthy families in Connecticut and Massachusetts. The final page of the letter contained a warning that made my blood run cold. Amanda plans to gain control of the estate and then sell it immediately. She has already been in contact with real estate developers who want to tear down our family home and build luxury condominiums. She intends to take the money and disappear possibly to another country where she cannot be extradited for her crimes. As I absorbed this information, I could hear voices escalating downstairs. Amanda was growing more aggressive with relatives who showed any sympathy for my situation. Through the study's partially open door, I caught fragments of her increasingly shrill demands for immediate compliance. I heard her threatening Uncle Robert. If you don't support the family's decision about Cyrus, you might find yourself cut off from any future financial assistance when the estate is settled. Aunt Patricia's voice wavered as she replied, Amanda, dear, I just think we should give him more time to understand what's happening. Time is exactly what we don't have, Amanda snapped back. Every day that Cyrus remains in control of this estate puts all of us at risk. His mental condition is deteriorating rapidly, and his delusions about money are becoming more dangerous. Benjamin Walsh's voice joined the conversation, though his words were too quiet for me to hear clearly. Whatever he said seemed to calm Amanda temporarily, but I could sense the underlying tension continuing to build. Looking through the study window, I saw several cars I didn't recognize parked along the circular driveway. Amanda had apparently invited people to tonight's gathering who weren't actually family members. The presence of strangers made the situation feel even more orchestrated and threatening. The investigative report included one final piece of information that explained everything Amanda had been planning this inheritance seizure for over a year. She had researched legal precedents for challenging wills based on mental incompetence claims, and she had systematically built false evidence to support her case. The depth of her planning was terrifying. She had created fake medical records, forged financial documents, and manipulated our mother's emotions with surgical precision. This wasn't a spontaneous attempt to steal money. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy my life and steal our family's legacy. As I finished reading the last document, I realized that my grandfather had given me proof of Amanda's crimes. But I still had no idea how to use that proof to stop her. Everyone downstairs believed her lies, and my protests would sound exactly like the mental illness symptoms she had described. The clock on the study wall showed that I had less than 4 hours until Amanda's midnight deadline. I needed allies, but everyone I trusted had already been turned against me by her manipulation and false evidence. I knew I had to confront Benjamin Walsh directly about what I'd discovered. Something about his behavior during Amanda's presentation had seemed off, and I needed to understand whose side he was really on. I found him alone in the library, supposedly reviewing legal documents, but his attention seemed focused elsewhere. "Mr. Walsh," I said quietly, closing the library door behind me. "I need to ask you some very direct questions about what's happening here tonight." He looked up from his papers with those sharp blue eyes and studied my face for a long moment. "I was wondering when you would seek me out, Cyrus. Please sit down. We have much to discuss." His tone was different from what I'd heard during Amanda's presentation. There was no condescension or concern about my supposed mental health. Instead, he spoke to me like an equal, which was the first normal interaction I'd had all evening. "Before we begin," he continued, "I need to tell you something that will change your understanding of everything that's happened tonight. My name is Benjamin Walsh, but I'm not your family's lawyer. I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division." The words hit me like a lightning bolt. I stared at him in complete shock, unable to process what he'd just revealed. "You're FBI, but you've been our family lawyer for months. You handled my grandfather's funeral arrangements." Agent Walsh reached into his jacket and produced official federal identification credentials. "Your real family lawyer, Thomas Morrison, died in a car accident 3 months ago. The circumstances of his death raised red flags in our fraud investigation unit. Mr. Morrison had been asking questions about suspicious banking activity related to your family's accounts. The revelation that our actual lawyer was dead sent chills down my spine. You think Amanda killed him? We can't prove that yet, but the timing was extremely convenient for her plans. Morrison had discovered irregularities in estate documentation and was preparing to contact federal authorities when his brakes failed on Route 9. Agent Walsh closed his credentials and leaned forward. "I've been investigating your sister for 18 months as part of a broader case involving inheritance fraud targeting wealthy New England families." My mind raced to catch up with these revelations. "So you know about the fake psychiatric reports? You know she's been lying about my mental health? Amanda has been running sophisticated inheritance scams across Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. She targets families with elderly patriarchs who have substantial estates, then manipulates family dynamics to gain control of those assets." He pulled out a tablet computer and showed me surveillance photos of Amanda meeting with various individuals I didn't recognize. She has accomplices in banking institutions, medical facilities, and legal offices who help her create fraudulent documentation. The photos showed Amanda in restaurants and offices, clearly conducting business meetings with people who looked like professionals. The timestamps indicated these meetings had been happening for over a year, confirming that her assault on our family had been planned far in advance. Dr. Harrison, the psychiatrist who supposedly treated you, is actually a suspended physician who creates false medical records for $500 per report. We've documented over 30 cases where he's provided fabricated psychiatric evaluations for Amanda's schemes. Agent Walsh showed me wiretap transcripts that made my stomach turn. I saw my sister's words in black and white discussing how to forge my grandfather's signature on estate documents and planning ways to manipulate our mother's emotional vulnerability. Amanda has already transferred $2 million from your grandfather's estate to offshore banking accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. She accomplished this by using forged power of attorney documents and her access to your grandfather's financial information during his final illness. The scope of her theft was staggering. She hadn't just planned to steal my inheritance, she'd already been stealing it for months while my grandfather was dying. The cruelty of robbing a man on his deathbed while pretending to care for him revealed a level of evil I hadn't imagined possible. Tonight's gathering serves multiple purposes for Amanda's final phase, Agent Walsh explained. She needs witnesses to your supposed mental incompetence to legitimize her legal claim to the remaining assets. She also needs your signature on documents that will give her complete control over the estate's liquid assets. I thought about all the relatives who had been convinced by her performance tonight. So everyone upstairs really believes I'm mentally ill. Some do, but others are being coerced through different methods. Amanda has been collecting compromising information about various family members for months. She has evidence of tax evasion, insurance fraud, and other illegal activities that she uses to ensure compliance with her plans. The idea that my sister had been systematically blackmailing our own relatives was almost too horrible to believe. How long have you known about tonight's plan? We've been monitoring her communications for 3 months. We knew she was planning to make her final move during the Thanksgiving gathering, but we needed her to attempt the actual fraud before we could make arrests. Federal prosecutors require evidence of completed crimes, not just conspiracy. Agent Walsh's explanation made me realize that I was essentially bait in an FBI investigation. So you're using me to catch her in the act. We're using her greed and arrogance against her. Amanda believes she's in complete control of this situation, but every word she's spoken tonight has been recorded by federal surveillance equipment. Her confession about the fake medical reports and her threats regarding involuntary commitment constitute multiple felony charges. The knowledge that federal agents were recording everything gave me some comfort. But I was still trapped in a nightmare scenario with my family turned against me. What happens if she figures out you're not really our lawyer? She won't. We've been very careful to maintain the fiction, and Amanda's ego makes her believe she's manipulating everyone around her. She thinks you're mentally ill and that I'm just another corrupt professional she can control. Agent Walsh showed me more surveillance evidence, including photographs of Amanda's secret apartment and documentation of her lavish spending while claiming financial hardship. The contrast between her public persona and her private lifestyle was stark. There's one more thing you need to know. Agent Walsh said, his voice growing more serious. We have evidence suggesting that your grandfather's death may not have been entirely natural. Preliminary toxicology tests detected traces of arsenic in tissue samples, but we need more evidence before we can pursue murder charges. The suggestion that Amanda had poisoned our grandfather made me feel physically sick. The woman upstairs manipulating our family wasn't just a thief, she might be a cold-blooded killer who had murdered the man who raised us. Tonight's operation will give us everything we need to arrest Amanda and dismantle her entire fraud network. But I need you to continue playing your part. Let her believe she's winning until we're ready to move. As Agent Walsh finished explaining the federal investigation, I heard Amanda's voice growing louder upstairs. She was demanding immediate signatures on her documents, and her patience with family resistance was clearly running out. The clock on the library wall showed that we were approaching Amanda's midnight deadline. Everything was building toward a confrontation that would either expose her crimes or destroy my life completely. I returned to the dining room with a new understanding of what was really happening. But I had to continue acting like the confused and vulnerable target Amanda believed me to be. She looked up expectantly as I walked back into the room, clearly hoping I had come to surrender to her demands. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her, trying to project uncertainty and defeat. "Maybe I should consider signing those papers after all." Amanda's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. "I'm so glad you're finally being reasonable, Cyrus. This is really for the best for everyone involved." But her moment of triumph made her careless. Instead of simply accepting my apparent surrender, she began revealing details about her plans that she should have kept secret. The alcohol she'd been drinking throughout the evening was loosening her tongue, and her confidence was making her reckless. "I've already spoken with real estate developers about the property," she announced to the gathered family. "The estate is actually worth much more than $8.8 million if we sell it to the right buyers. I've had preliminary discussions about developing this land into luxury condominiums." Uncle Robert looked genuinely shocked. "Amanda, this house has been in our family for 4 generations. Your grandfather specifically wanted it preserved as our family's gathering place." "Uncle Robert, we have to be practical about money in today's economy," Amanda replied with condescending patience. "Maintaining this property costs over $200,000 per year in taxes, insurance, and upkeep. It makes much more financial sense to liquidate the asset and invest the proceeds more wisely." She pulled out her tablet computer and began showing relatives architectural plans and financial projections that she had apparently commissioned months earlier. The documents showed the family estate bulldozed and replaced with 24 luxury units with projected profits exceeding $15 million. "I've also had the estate appraised by independent professionals." Amanda continued producing more documents. "These appraisals show the property is worth only $4 million as a single-family residence, but up to $18 million as a development opportunity." Aunt Patricia frowned as she examined the appraisal documents. "These numbers seem much lower than what your grandfather always told us the estate was worth." "Grandfather's financial understanding wasn't always accurate in his final years," Amanda replied smoothly. "The appraisers I hired are certified professionals who specialize in Connecticut real estate markets. I noticed that the appraisal documents were dated only 2 weeks ago, which meant Amanda had been planning to sell the property long before tonight's supposed emergency regarding my mental health." She was revealing that her entire story about protecting the family's interests was a lie. But Amanda's overconfidence led her to an even more damaging revelation. She opened a different folder on her tablet and began showing the family what appeared to be personal information about each of them. "Before we finalize tonight's decisions, I think everyone should understand the complete financial picture our family is facing," she said with a smile that made my blood run cold. "I've been conducting research to ensure that everyone's interests are properly protected." She turned the tablet toward Uncle Robert. "For example, I've discovered that Uncle Robert has been underreporting his construction business income to the IRS for several years. The tax liability could be quite substantial if the federal government decided to audit his returns." Uncle Robert's face went white. "Amanda, how did you get information about my business taxes?" "I have friends who work in various professional capacities," she replied vaguely. "Aunt Patricia, I've also learned some interesting things about your insurance claims following your house fire 2 years ago." Aunt Patricia began to look genuinely frightened. "What are you talking about?" Amanda showed her more documents on the tablet screen. "The insurance investigators missed some important details about the fire's origin. It would be unfortunate if someone brought those details to their attention now that the claim has been settled." I watched in horror as Amanda systematically revealed that she had damaging information about nearly everyone in the room. She had evidence of Cousin Jake's marijuana dealing operation at his college, documentation of my mother's tax-free gifts that exceeded federal reporting requirements, and photographs showing various relatives in compromising situations. "I want everyone to understand that I'm not threatening anyone," Amanda said with false sweetness. "I'm simply trying to ensure that our family makes decisions that protect everyone's interests." Sometimes that means keeping certain information private within our family circle. The relatives who had initially supported her claims against me now looked terrified, as they realized she had been collecting blackmail material against all of them. The woman they thought was trying to protect the family was actually holding everyone hostage with their personal secrets. But Amanda's most shocking revelation came when she showed them video footage on her tablet. I've also installed security cameras throughout this house to protect against theft and vandalism. Those cameras have recorded some very interesting conversations over the past several months. She played clips of relatives making private comments about family finances, personal relationships, and business dealings that they clearly never intended to share with others. Amanda had been secretly recording everyone for months, building an arsenal of blackmail material to use exactly as she was using it tonight. Jake, your parents might be interested to know about your plans to drop out of college and move to California with your girlfriend. Patricia, your husband doesn't know about your gambling debts from the casino trips to Foxwoods, does he? Each revelation hit its target like a precision strike. Amanda had studied everyone's vulnerabilities and collected exactly the information she needed to control their behavior. She wasn't just stealing money, she was destroying the family's trust in each other. My mother sat in stunned silence as she realized how thoroughly Amanda had manipulated not just her emotions, but everyone's secrets and fears. The daughter she thought was protecting the family was actually holding everyone prisoner with their own private information. "I need signatures on these transfer documents tonight," Amanda declared, returning to her original demand. Anyone who chooses not to support this decision might find that their personal information becomes less private than they would prefer. The room filled with a terrible silence as everyone processed what Amanda was really telling them. She had turned their family gathering into a hostage situation where compliance was ensured through blackmail and intimidation. Agent Walsh sat quietly observing Amanda's confession to multiple federal crimes, including extortion, blackmail, invasion of privacy, and conspiracy. Every word she spoke was being recorded by federal surveillance equipment, giving prosecutors everything they needed for a comprehensive criminal case. But Amanda wasn't finished. She looked directly at me with cold calculation. "Cyrus, you have exactly 30 minutes to sign these papers before I contact Dr. Harrison about emergency psychiatric commitment proceedings. After midnight, your cooperation becomes irrelevant because you'll be in a secure facility undergoing treatment for your mental health crisis." The countdown to midnight felt like a bomb timer ticking toward an explosion that would destroy everything I cared about. Amanda had cornered not just me, but our entire family, using their secrets and fears as weapons to ensure their silence and compliance. The trap was set, but I still didn't know when or how Agent Walsh planned to spring it. All I could do was continue playing my role and hope that federal justice would arrive before Amanda's deadline destroyed my life forever. I looked around the room at my family members' frightened faces and realized that this was the moment everything had been building toward. Amanda thought she held all the cards, but she had no idea that her entire scheme was built on a foundation that had already crumbled. Standing up slowly, I addressed the room with a calm confidence that surprised even me. "Amanda, before I sign anything, I think our family deserves to know the complete truth about what's been happening here." She looked annoyed, but not particularly concerned. "Cyrus, we don't have time for more of your confused rambling. You need to focus on the reality of your situation. The reality is that everything you've told our family tonight is based on a fundamental misunderstanding," I said, pulling out the documents I had found in my grandfather's safe. "You see, our grandfather anticipated exactly what you would try to do, and he took legal action to protect all of us from your schemes." Amanda's confident expression wavered slightly. "What are you talking about?" I held up the official trust documentation that my grandfather had filed with both federal and state authorities months before his death. The $8.8 million estate you're trying to claim doesn't actually belong to any individual family member anymore. Grandfather transferred the entire estate into an irrevocable family trust with me as the sole trustee. The room erupted in confused murmurs as relatives tried to understand what this meant. Amanda grabbed the documents from my hands and scanned them frantically, her face growing paler with each page. "This is impossible," she said, her voice rising. "These documents are fake. You forged these to try to get out of signing the transfer papers." The trust was established through the law firm of Morrison Chen and Associates in Hartford. I continued calmly. "All the documentation has been filed with the Connecticut Secretary of State's office, the Internal Revenue Service, and the federal court system. You can verify the authenticity of these documents through any of those agencies." Agent Walsh spoke for the first time in over an hour. "I can confirm that these trust documents are completely legitimate and legally binding. The estate transfer was properly executed according to Connecticut state law and federal tax regulations." Amanda stared at the trust paperwork, as if she could make it disappear through sheer force of will. "But this means that all my legal research, all the psychiatric evaluations, all the transfer documents I prepared, are completely worthless." "That's exactly what it means," I said. "You can't claim mental incompetence against me to seize control of property that isn't mine to begin with. The trust owns the estate, and the trust has very specific provisions about how it operates." I showed the family the relevant sections of the trust documentation. Grandfather included specific language preventing any family member from using mental health claims to alter the trust's management. He also created protections for all family members against financial liability and provided funding for legal defense if anyone tries to challenge the trust structure. Uncle Robert looked up from reading the documents with obvious relief. "This means Amanda's threats about tax audits and insurance investigations don't have any power over the trust's assets. The trust has provisions for protecting beneficiaries from exactly the kinds of blackmail and extortion that Amanda has been using tonight." I explained. "Everyone in this room is protected by the trust's legal structure from retaliation based on personal information." Amanda's tablet computer, which had been her weapon of blackmail just minutes earlier, now looked like nothing more than an expensive toy. The secrets she had collected couldn't be used to control people who were protected by an ironclad legal trust. But the trust documents revealed even more devastating information about Amanda's criminal activities. My grandfather had included detailed appendices documenting her embezzlement from his accounts, her role in our father's business failure, and her manipulation of various family members over the years. "Grandfather spent months collecting evidence of your crimes, Amanda," I said, showing the family photographs and financial records that proved her theft. "He knew you had been stealing from him, and he knew you were planning to steal from all of us after his death." "Art," my mother stared at documents showing Amanda's secret bank accounts and luxury spending while she had been claiming poverty and asking for financial help. "Amanda, you told me you couldn't afford to contribute to your grandmother's nursing home care." "Mother, I can explain all of this," Amanda said desperately, but her explanation sounded hollow when confronted with photographic evidence of her deception. The trust documents also included copies of all the evidence that my grandfather had gathered about Amanda's criminal network. The fake medical reports, the forged financial documents, and the blackmail material were all documented and preserved as evidence of her systematic fraud. Agent Walsh stood up and addressed the room officially. "The federal investigation into Amanda's activities has been ongoing for 18 months. Tonight's events have provided us with sufficient evidence to proceed with comprehensive federal charges against her and her accomplices." Amanda looked around the room, desperately searching for any remaining leverage or sympathy. "You're all making a terrible mistake. I was trying to protect this family from Cyrus's mental illness and financial irresponsibility. The only mental illness in this room is your sociopathic willingness to destroy your own family for money," I replied. "The trust protects everyone here from your manipulation, and federal law enforcement will protect society from your criminal activities." My mother finally understood the full scope of how Amanda had manipulated her grief and fear. She stood up and walked over to me with tears streaming down her face. Cyrus, I am so deeply sorry for believing her lies and for striking you tonight. I don't know how I can ever make this right. You were grieving and vulnerable, and Amanda took advantage of that, I said, embracing my mother for the first time in months. What matters now is that our family can heal from the damage she's caused. The relatives who had been terrified of Amanda's blackmail threats now looked at her with a mixture of disgust and pity. The woman they had feared was revealed as nothing more than a criminal who had preyed on their love and loyalty. Amanda made one final desperate attempt to salvage her position. I'll challenge this trust in court. I'll prove that grandfather was mentally incompetent when he signed these documents. Agent Walsh smiled grimly. You'll find it difficult to challenge legal documents from a federal prison cell, and the trust includes specific provisions requiring anyone who challenges it to pay all legal costs for the successful defense. The trap had finally closed around Amanda, but she still had one more devastating secret that none of us were prepared to hear. Agent Walsh stood up and spoke into what I now realized was a concealed microphone. Control this as Agent Walsh. We have sufficient evidence for arrest. Move in now. Within seconds, the dining room filled with federal agents wearing FBI tactical gear. They had been positioned around the property all evening, waiting for Amanda's confession to be complete before taking action. The coordination was so smooth that Amanda barely had time to react before she was surrounded. Amanda Chen, Agent Walsh said formally, producing handcuffs and federal arrest warrant. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud money, laundering extortion, blackmail, identity theft, and violation of federal banking regulations. As the agents began reading Amanda, her constitutional rights, something inside her seemed to snap completely. Instead of the fear or remorse I might have expected, she began laughing in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the laugh of someone who found something funny. It was the laugh of someone whose grip on sanity had finally broken. You think you're so clever, don't you? She said, looking directly at me with eyes that seemed to burn with hatred. You think you've won something important here tonight? Agent Walsh tried to continue with the arrest procedure, but Amanda kept talking with manic energy. Before you take me away, let me give this family one final gift. Let me tell you about dear sweet grandfather's last few weeks of life. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what she was about to reveal. Agent Walsh had mentioned suspicions about my grandfather's death, but I hadn't wanted to believe that Amanda could be capable of actual murder. Grandfather didn't die peacefully in his sleep, like everyone thinks, Amanda announced with horrifying satisfaction. He died because I wanted him to die, and I made sure it happened exactly when I needed it to happen. My mother gasped and sank back into her chair. The federal agent stopped moving and focused intently on Amanda's spontaneous confession to what was clearly going to be murder. I researched untraceable poisons on the internet for months before I found the perfect solution. Amanda continued, her voice growing more excited as she described her crime. Arsenic is wonderfully subtle when administered in small doses over several weeks. The symptoms look exactly like natural aging and organ failure. Agent Walsh activated a portable recording device to capture Amanda's confession in addition to the surveillance equipment that had been running all evening. Amanda Chen, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. But Amanda was beyond caring about legal warnings. The thrill of finally revealing her complete control over our family's fate was too intoxicating for her to stop. I slipped tiny amounts of arsenic into his coffee every morning when I visited to help take care of him during his final illness. The visiting nurses thought I was such a devoted granddaughter. The casual way she described poisoning our grandfather made several relatives physically sick. Uncle Robert rushed to the bathroom, and Aunt Patricia began sobbing uncontrollably. The best part was watching him decline while everyone praised me for being so caring and supportive. Amanda continued with demonic glee. I would sit by his bedside holding his hand while the poison I'd given him slowly shut down his kidneys and liver. Agent Walsh tried again to stop her from incriminating herself further, but Amanda was determined to reveal the full scope of her evil. I also had help from someone at Hartford Hospital, who made sure his medical records showed natural causes of death instead of poison symptoms. This revelation meant that Amanda had accomplices in the medical system who had helped her cover up murder. The federal investigation was apparently much larger than I had realized, involving corruption in multiple institutions. When grandfather started asking too many questions about missing money from his accounts, I knew I had to accelerate his death schedule. Amanda explained with scientific detachment. I increased his arsenic doses and made sure he died before he could contact any lawyers or investigators. The admission that she had murdered him specifically to prevent him from exposing her theft was devastating. Amanda hadn't just killed our grandfather. She had tortured him with poison while he tried to protect our family from her crimes. Agent Walsh finally managed to interrupt her confession. Amanda Chen, you are also under arrest for the first-degree murder of Harold Chen. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. But Amanda just laughed louder. You'll never be able to prove murder unless you exhume his body and test for arsenic. And even if you do find poison, you'll never be able to prove that I was the one who administered it. We exhumed your grandfather's remains 3 weeks ago, Agent Walsh replied calmly. The toxicology results confirmed lethal levels of arsenic in his tissue samples. Your confession tonight provides the final evidence we needed to prove you were the source of that poison. For the first time all evening, Amanda looked genuinely shocked. She had no idea that federal investigators had already gathered physical evidence of her murder. Her confident confession had just sealed her fate for a crime she thought she had gotten away with. The federal agents placed Amanda in handcuffs and began escorting her toward the front door. But she wasn't finished trying to hurt our family. As they led her past my mother's chair, she leaned down and whispered something that made my mother scream in anguish. What did she say to you? I asked, rushing to comfort my mother. Through her tears, my mother managed to repeat Amanda's final cruelty. She said that our father's heart attack was just the beginning and that she had been planning to poison me next if I didn't cooperate with her inheritance plans. The suggestion that Amanda had been planning to murder our mother as well was the final proof that we weren't dealing with a desperate criminal, but with a calculating sociopath who viewed family members as obstacles to be eliminated. As the federal agents loaded Amanda into their vehicle, she continued screaming threats and accusations at everyone who had failed to support her schemes. Her complete break from reality made it clear that she was not just a criminal, but someone whose mental state had deteriorated beyond any possibility of redemption. Agent Walsh approached me as the other agents finished securing the crime scene. I need you to know that Amanda's confession tonight will result in federal charges that could include the death penalty. Are you prepared for what that might mean for your family? Looking around at my relatives who were still processing the horror of what they had witnessed, I realized that Amanda's arrest was just the beginning of a long healing process for all of us. She made her choices, I said finally. Now she has to face the consequences of those choices. Our family needs to focus on recovering from the damage she's caused, not on protecting someone who was willing to kill us for money. The woman who had been my sister was gone, replaced by a monster who had murdered our grandfather and planned to murder our mother. Justice had arrived, but the emotional cost of that justice was going to take years for our family to fully understand. 6 months later, I stood in the same dining room where Amanda had tried to destroy our family, but everything felt completely different now. The heavy atmosphere of fear and manipulation had been replaced by something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine peace and security. The federal trial had concluded 3 weeks ago, with Amanda receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The evidence against her had been overwhelming, and her own videotaped confession had made the prosecution's case ironclad. She would spend the rest of her life in federal prison, which meant our family could finally begin healing without fear of her return. My mother had undergone intensive therapy to process not just her grief over losing my grandfather, but also the trauma of realizing how completely Amanda had manipulated her emotions and judgment. The guilt she felt about striking me that night at the gathering had been eating away at her. But our relationship had grown stronger through honest communication about what we had both experienced. I keep wondering how I could have been so blind to what she was really doing, my mother said as we sat together in the study where I had first discovered my grandfather's hidden evidence. The signs were all there, but I was so afraid of being alone that I let her convince me you were the problem. Amanda was a master manipulator who had been practicing her techniques for years. I replied, holding my mother's hand. She studied your vulnerabilities and used them against you with surgical precision. What matters now is that we're both free from her influence and can build an honest relationship going forward. The family trust had worked exactly as my grandfather had intended. Instead of creating conflict over inheritance, it had provided security and protection for everyone who had been targeted by Amanda's schemes. Uncle Robert had been able to resolve his tax issues without fear of financial ruin, and Aunt Patricia had received support to address her gambling debts through legitimate means rather than insurance fraud. Cousin Jake had used trust funds to complete drug rehabilitation treatment and was now working as an apprentice electrician while finishing his college degree online. The young man who had been dealing marijuana and headed towards serious legal trouble was building a legitimate career with the support and guidance of family members who genuinely cared about his success. The trust had also enabled us to establish the Harold Chen Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention, which provided resources and support for families dealing with financial exploitation of elderly relatives. My grandfather's legacy was now helping other families avoid the kind of manipulation and theft that Amanda had inflicted on us. The secret recordings and surveillance equipment that Amanda had installed throughout the house had been completely removed by federal investigators. Our family gatherings were now private again based on trust and genuine affection rather than fear of exposure and blackmail. But perhaps the most important change was the quality of our family relationships. Without Amanda's constant manipulation and poisonous influence, relatives who had been turned against each other were rediscovering their natural bonds of love and support. Uncle Robert and I had developed a close working relationship, managing the trust's charitable activities, and Aunt Patricia had become one of my mother's closest emotional supporters. The estate itself had been restored to its original purpose as a gathering place for family celebrations and important conversations. Instead of being torn down for luxury condominiums, it was serving multiple generations of relatives who understood its value as something that couldn't be measured in dollars. Agent Walsh, whose real name I learned was Special Agent Benjamin Torres, had become an unexpected friend during the months of legal proceedings. His patient explanation of federal investigation procedures had helped our family understand how extensive Amanda's criminal network had actually been. Your sister's arrest led to prosecutions in 7 states, he explained during one of our conversations. She had accomplices in banks, medical facilities, legal offices, and insurance companies. The federal task force shut down an entire network of inheritance fraud operations that had been stealing from families throughout New England. The knowledge that Amanda's crimes had extended far beyond our family was both horrifying and somewhat comforting. We weren't the only people who had been fooled by her manipulations, and our experience was helping protect other families from similar victimization. Dr. Harrison, the corrupt physician who had created fake psychiatric reports, was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison and permanently lost his medical license. The fake medical clinic where Amanda had supposedly been treating me was shut down, and several other doctors involved in the fraud network were prosecuted for their roles in creating false medical records. The real estate developers who had been planning to purchase our family estate for luxury development were investigated for their connections to Amanda's schemes. While they weren't charged with criminal activity, their business practices came under federal scrutiny that eventually led to revelations about other questionable development projects. My mother and I had established new traditions for family gatherings that emphasized honest communication and mutual support. Instead of formal dinners, where people felt pressure to present perfect facades, we organized casual activities where relatives could share their genuine thoughts and concerns without fear of judgment or manipulation. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships. My mother reflected during our most recent gathering. It's about people who choose to support each other through difficult times and celebrate each other's successes without hidden agendas. The trust structure had given me significant responsibility for managing family resources, but it had also provided clear guidelines about how those resources should be used for everyone's benefit. Instead of creating resentment about unequal inheritance, the trust had become a source of security and opportunity for the entire extended family. As I looked around the dining room where Amanda had tried to destroy everything our grandfather had built, I felt profound gratitude for his wisdom and foresight. He had understood Amanda's true nature long before anyone else, and his careful planning had saved not just our financial security but our family relationships. The most important lesson I had learned through this entire ordeal was that genuine strength comes from protecting others rather than exploiting them. Amanda had pursued power through manipulation, theft, and even murder, but that path had ultimately led to complete destruction of everything she claimed to value. My grandfather's approach had been completely different. He had used his resources and influence to create security and opportunity for multiple generations of family members. His legacy wasn't measured in dollars, but in the love and trust that continued to grow between people he cared about. The evening sun was setting through the dining room windows as I finished reflecting on how much our family had changed and grown over the past months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but we would face them together as people who had learned to value honesty, loyalty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. I realized that my grandfather's greatest gift to our family wasn't the money he had left us, but the example he had set for using resources to build something lasting and meaningful. The trust he had created wasn't just about financial assets. It was about creating trust between people who chose to support each other through whatever difficulties life might bring. As I turned off the lights in the dining room and headed upstairs, I felt confident that our family would continue growing stronger and more united with each passing year. Amanda's attempt to destroy us had ultimately revealed the depth of love and loyalty that connected us to each other. The inheritance she had tried to steal was never really about money at all. It was about belonging to something larger than ourselves and knowing that we had the support of people who genuinely cared about our happiness and success. That was a legacy no criminal could ever take away from us. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust for personal gain? How did you rebuild your ability to trust others after discovering someone's true motives were so different from what they pretended? I'd love to hear about your experiences with family dynamics and how you've worked to maintain healthy relationships despite challenges and conflicts. Thank you for joining me through this difficult but ultimately hopeful story about how families can survive even the most devastating betrayals when they choose to support each other with honesty and genuine love. I hope sharing my experience helps others recognize the warning signs of manipulation and understand the importance of protecting vulnerable family members from those who would exploit their trust. Please like this video. If it resonated with your own experiences, subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Share it with anyone who might benefit from understanding how trust can be rebuilt after betrayal, and comment below with your thoughts about maintaining healthy boundaries with family members who may not have your best interests at heart. Remember that no matter how dark things may seem when you're dealing with family betrayal, there are always people and resources available to help you protect yourself and rebuild stronger relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care.